Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Jack Hagel. North Carolina's public universities are trying to help the state's school children learn to read, but a recent report shows they're not doing enough. So the state is making changes to how educators teach reading to its youngest students, and it's spending tens of millions of dollars to do it. WRAL Education Insider Emily Walkenhorst is here to explain the effort and what happens if it fails. Emily, welcome back.
Good to be here.
Emily, first off, when it comes to reading, how are North Carolina students doing?
So depending on which test you look at, the National Assessment for Educational Progress shows most North Carolina students are not reading proficiently. The consensus is generally more North Carolina kids need to be at their grade level and reading proficiently.
Now, much of our coverage focuses on student performance. Your recent reporting zeroes in on teachers. Tell us about this review.
The University of North Carolina system basically hired a group to review how the state's colleges of education, the public colleges of education, were preparing future teachers to teach students how to read. So they hired this group called TPI US, and they had them review coursework, syllabi, things like that, and basically make an assessment of, are they employing, what the state calls the science of reading? Are they teaching children, teachers to teach children how to read using certain principles they believe are founded and based in evidence and science?
So what did the review find?
So the review found that there are a handful of universities that seem to be doing a pretty good job. They still made some recommendations for them, like, hey, you could do this or that better. This one course was great. You should do more of that in this other course. But most of the state's universities came in as a needs improvement. And one of them actually came in as just inadequate in terms of incorporating the science of reading, so to speak. And some of that inadequacy was maybe just some inconsistency across courses, like maybe a course, really defined certain terms in a different way than a different course did. But there were also a couple of instances in which they said, not every course is teaching about reading the way that we want it to be teaching.
So what's the state doing to solve the problem, and what does success look like?
So the UNC System Board of Governors, they received this report and they said, this isn't good enough. We want everybody to be at that higher rating of, meeting expectations. So they said to, several of the state's universities, you have to make some changes. You need to implement some of these recommendations, and you have to do it by the end of the fiscal year. So it's June 30th. Or the system, the Board of Governors, basically says they're going to act, and that could mean different things. But they said, this is basically your deadline because we want to make sure that you're preparing teachers in the way that we want you to.
And what does the board mean by act?
Basically, they want to see, results. They want to see these universities all incorporating the science of reading. So they're going to take whatever action needs to be done to make sure that schools are, that the coursework and the syllabi align with what they think it should align with.
Emily, how did this review come about? Why now?
So back in 2021, the North Carolina General Assembly passed a bill that overhauled the state's reading program. So for the last several years, we've had Read to Achieve, which has been kind of this signature movement among Republican leaders in the legislature, trying to improve reading scores for North Carolina students. But it hasn't necessarily seen a lot of results, especially with the summer program, and they really wanted to incorporate some new changes. So this is all based on new changes that leadership believe will actually enhance reading education. And so a part of that is getting kind of everybody in line with that new approach to teaching. So that involves universities, it involves K-12 schools. So at the university level, they have a deadline to basically incorporate this new way of teaching kids to read. And so that deadline is looming. And so they conducted this report at the UNC system level to figure out basically how close they are to meeting those deadlines and those legislative requirements.
Well, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk about how reading education has evolved. Stick around. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. We're talking with WRAL Education Insider Emily Walkenhorst about the state's efforts to improve reading education. Emily, the group conducting this review refers to the science of reading. What is that?
So the science of reading is this term that we're hearing a lot more of these days in education circles and even now broadly, that basically refers to emphasizing what research out there says about teaching reading. So it's kind of come about because people believe that the evidence has been ignored for a while. So the science of reading refers to some of the things research has indicated are effective at helping people of any age learn to read. So a lot of that is really an emphasis on phonics. So an emphasis on writing and spelling and things that are really about stringing letters and syllables together and understanding patterns. And there's always been some phonics education in schools. That's not revolutionary today, but the emphasis of the science of reading is more of an emphasis on phonics versus maybe some of the other things we've seen in classrooms lately. So other things maybe we've seen in classrooms in recent years have been, using different cues. So maybe a picture or context clues to help somebody understand what a word is. So if you saw like a picture of an animal and then the word of what that animal is below it. If the child depended on the picture to understand what the word is, the thinking is they're not really reading that word because they're not really going letter by letter to identify what that word is. They're kind of skipping that process by recognizing the animal they're looking at.
That sounds like a lot of change.
It is a big change, especially because a lot of the textbooks and instructional materials teachers have really emphasized things like cueing. So essentially, the way of doing something is changing, and the people who are at these universities are having to rethink things. And a lot of them may have been evolving all this time along with that science anyway, but every institution is going to be different and everybody's going to interpret what they see a little bit differently. So there's a process to kind of everybody getting on that same page.
So which universities are doing this well and which need help?
So most of the state's universities came in as needing some improvement. There was one university that had an inadequate score. That was East Carolina University, which is actually the state's largest college of education. There were some strengths at the university, but the reviewers really criticized a couple of classes that were required for elementary education and special education teachers that really just seemed to resist the science of reading. And really what that came down to was the instructor in that class having their own idea about how reading should be taught. The school that got the best score was University of North Carolina, Charlotte. They're one of the biggest education schools in the state. I talked to them. I also talked to NC State University, which got a good score as well. And they talked about how, they've been kind of evolving along with the science all along. At NC State, they said, this wasn't a revolutionary thing for us. We've been doing some of these things all along. And so it's been easier for them to transition into this new curriculum. That's according to them.
You mentioned that the UNC Board of Governors is paying close attention to this. Are lawmakers doing anything? And if so, what are they doing to support the effort?
So in that 2021 legislation, they basically provided after the legislation, they provided over $50 million for K-12 schools to train all of their teachers on this new science of reading. It's been, well over 100 hours of training after school and on weekends for teachers. And that will be complete in another year or so. And there was also a significant investment in the K-12 level as far as getting people in the schools training teachers in addition to that, software program. But at the higher education level, there wasn't a financial investment. There was a private donation to the UNC system to get faculty members to participate in some of that same training K-12 teachers were participating in. So at the higher education level, there's been less of a financial investment and more just kind of a mandate for people to make this adjustment.
So what's next? And when are we going to start seeing the results of all this? When are we going to know if it's worked?
So it'll be a couple of years before all of the deadlines fall into place as far as all of the training that people are required to do, all of the changes in curriculum that are required to be made. And then after that, it's a matter of kind of getting into the rhythm of doing this new instruction, getting the hang of it, understanding it better. And so it's not going to change reading scores overnight. We're not going to go from a minority of students reading proficiently this year to 100% reading proficiently next year. There's a lot that is required to kind of gradually move things along, but there's high hopes that things will improve, and it'll just be a few years before we get a sense of perhaps the impact some of this change has made.
Well, I know that you'll be watching, and I know that you'll keep readers and viewers posted. Emily, thank you.
Absolutely.
That's WRAL Education Insider Emily Walkenhorst for her deep dive on reading education in North Carolina. Visit the education section of WRAL.com. I'm Jack Hagel. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and for making us part of your morning routine. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email with Triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.